My mother stood up at my cousin's engagement dinner, tapped her fork against her wine glass, and announced to 30 people that she'd finally fixed my credit problem. She said it like a gift. She said it in the tone people use when they want applause. What she didn't know was that the loan she was talking about had been paid off in full 3 years earlier, by me, in cash, and that the paperwork she'd just waved around the table proved something much worse than bad credit. It proved fraud. Welcome back to Betrayal Ledger, where the quiet ones keep the paper trail and the truth always gets read out loud eventually. I'm Dana. I'm 31. I'm a forensic accountant, and this is the story of the night my mother handed me the evidence herself, in front of everyone, thinking she was finally the hero. Drop a comment, tell me where you're watching from, and subscribe before we get into it. It started 3 weeks before that dinner with a letter. The letter came from a credit monitoring service I'd signed up for out of professional habit, not fear. It flagged a hard inquiry and a new account opened in my name 8 months earlier. An auto loan. $34,000. A car I had never test-driven, never signed for, never seen. I sat with that letter at my kitchen table the way I sit with a suspicious ledger at work. No panic first, just questions. Who had my social security number memorized? Who had access to my old mail? Who had, at some point, asked me for, just my ID real quick, honey, for the insurance thing? My mother had asked me for exactly that, 8 months earlier, standing in my kitchen, telling me my stepfather's agent needed a copy for a policy update. I'd handed it over without thinking twice, because that's what you do for your mother. I didn't call her that night. I've learned that the moment you feel the ground shift under you is the worst possible moment to speak. So instead, I did what I always do. I opened a blank document and I started a timeline. Here's who my mother is, because it matters. Carol raised my sister Bethany and me mostly alone after our father left, and she is, in her own way, a survivor. She just survives by managing appearances instead of managing money. She's spent 30 years telling church friends and neighbors that everything is fine, that Bethany's wedding was modest, that the new kitchen was on sale, that the family was doing great. Thank you for asking. I used to think that was harmless vanity. I've since learned it's a coping mechanism with a body count, and I was apparently part of what it cost. My stepfather Glenn runs a small used car lot 2 towns over. Cash flow business, the kind where a slow month can sink you fast. I'd noticed, over the past year, that dinners at their place had gotten quieter about money in a way that felt less like privacy and more like avoidance. I filed that away the way I file everything, mark it, watch it, come back to it. The first thing I did was pull my full credit file, not the summary, the whole file, every page. The loan had been originated through a small regional lender I didn't recognize, financing a vehicle from, of course, Glenn's dealership. The application listed my name, my social, my old address from 4 years ago, and a phone number that wasn't mine. It also listed an employer, Glenn's dealership itself, with a job title I have never held in my life. I called the lender's fraud line the next morning, not to accuse anyone yet, just to open a dispute file and get a certified copy of the signed application. That's a real thing you can do. A consumer has the right to see exactly what was submitted in their name. The woman on the phone told me it would take 5 to 7 business days to pull the signed documents from underwriting. I thanked her, hung up, and started building the rest of the picture while I waited, because waiting empty-handed isn't something I know how to do. I drove past the dealership on my lunch break, not to go in, just to look. Sitting on the lot, with a paper plate in the windshield, was a silver SUV I recognized instantly. It was the exact car my sister Bethany had posted about 8 months ago, captioned, "Glenn hooked us up," with 3 heart emojis. I sat in my car across the street and felt something settle into place with the quiet, sick click of a number that finally balances. Here's what I want you to understand about my sister, because it matters for what comes later. Bethany is 28, married 2 years, and has never in her life been told no by anyone in this family. When she wanted a wedding the budget didn't support, my mother found a way. When she wanted a starter home a year later that was, by any honest measure, not a starter home, Glenn found a way. I used to be the way. Quietly, for years, I'd covered small gaps, a car repair here, a security deposit there, because asking me felt, to them, like using a coupon. I never resented it exactly. I just noticed, the way you notice a hairline crack, that I was never once asked how I was doing. Only what I could cover. So when I put the SUV on the lot next to the loan in my name, I didn't need a confession. I needed the paperwork to say it plainly, because in my family, only paperwork is ever believed. The signed application arrived 9 days later in a plain envelope from the lender's compliance department. I read it standing in my kitchen, and my hands, which do not usually shake, went very still in the particular way they do when I already know what I'm about to see. The signature on the buyer line was not mine. It was close. Someone had clearly practiced my initials off an old check, but I sign 100 documents a year for work, and I know my own hand. More importantly, the notarization block at the bottom listed a date and a location, a notary at a shipping store 2 towns over, at 11:40 in the morning on a Tuesday. That Tuesday, at 11:40 in the morning, I was in a client meeting 40 minutes away, badge swiped into a secure building with a sign-in log, a parking garage ticket timestamped to the minute, and 6 coworkers who could place me in that room. I am, professionally, someone whose whereabouts are always documented, and for the first time in my life, I was deeply grateful for corporate access logs. I didn't call my mother. I called a consumer fraud attorney a colleague had used before, a sharp, unhurried woman named Priya Osei, and I laid it out for her the way I'd want a client to lay it out for me: dates, documents, no adjectives. She listened, then told me the shape of what came next. First, a formal identity theft report with the FTC and the local police, which creates an official record independent of anything my family could later spin. Second, a dispute with all 3 credit bureaus, backed by my badge logs, to get the account removed from my file entirely, regardless of how the criminal side resolved. Third, and only if I wanted it, a referral to the DA's office, because knowingly forging a signature on a financing document isn't a family misunderstanding. It's a felony. You don't have to decide the third part yet, Priya told me. Get the paper trail bulletproof first. People reveal themselves once they think they're not being watched. She was right, though not in the way either of us expected. 2 weeks into the dispute process, my mother called to invite me to Bethany's engagement dinner. Bethany was engaged to her long-term boyfriend. A small family gathering at Carol and Glenn's house. Nothing fancy. Honey, just us. I almost said no. Then I thought about what Priya had said, about people revealing themselves when they think no one's watching, and I realized the safest place to watch my family be exactly themselves was a room where they thought the show was for someone else. I said I'd come. In the days before the dinner, I finished the quiet part of the work. The bureaus had already flagged the account as disputed pending investigation, which meant it was frozen from affecting my score further, but not yet erased. My badge records and parking log were formally submitted as an alibi exhibit. The police report was filed and assigned a case number. And the fraud unit at the lender, once shown my employer's access logs against the notarization timestamp, escalated the file themselves. Because a bank does not want to be caught having funded a car with a forged signature any more than I wanted to be the one carrying it. Priya mentioned, almost as an aside, that the lender's compliance team had flagged Glenn's dealership before on an unrelated financing matter, and that my file wasn't the only one sitting in that stack. I hadn't started an investigation from nothing. I'd just handed a name to a folder that was already open. I printed everything. The credit file. The forged application, side by side with 3 samples of my real signature. The badge log and parking ticket, timestamped to the minute the notary swore I was standing in a shipping store 40 miles away. The police report number. I put it all in a plain folder, the kind I use for clients, and on the morning of the dinner, I slid it into my bag without deciding yet whether I'd ever take it out. The dinner was exactly what I expected: candles, a roast Carol had clearly spent all day on, Bethany glowing next to her fiancé, Glenn pouring wine like a man with nothing on his mind. I sat near the end of the table, the way I always do, and I watched, because watching is the other half of my job. About halfway through the meal, my mother tapped her wine glass with a fork. the way she does when she wants a room's attention, and stood up. She started with the toast you'd expect, proud of Bethany, proud of the family, grateful for how far we'd all come. Then her eyes landed on me, and she smiled the particular smile she saves for moments she's decided will make her look generous. "And I have to say," she said, to the whole table, "I finally got Dana's credit sorted out. I know money things have always been hard for her, so Glenn and I took care of a little loan situation behind the scenes. We just want her to know she doesn't have to carry everything alone." Nobody at that table knew what she meant exactly, but everybody nodded, because that's what you do when Carol delivers a line like a verdict. Bethany squeezed her fiancé's hand. Glenn refilled his own glass and didn't look at me. I didn't raise my voice. I have learned, in 12 years of finding fraud for a living, that the loudest person in the room is never the one people remember afterward. "What loan situation, Mom?" I asked, calm, the way I'd ask a client to walk me through a line item. She waved a hand. "The car loan. We handled it so it wouldn't hurt your credit long term." "There's no car loan of mine to handle," I said. "I've never financed a car in my life." Her smile flickered, the way a smile does when it's about to become a different expression entirely. "Well, it's in your name, sweetheart, It's in my name," I said, "because someone forged my signature on a financing application 8 months ago, notarized at a shipping store 40 miles from where I was sitting at my desk with a badge scanner logging my location to the minute. I have the timestamp. I have the badge log. I have a police report and a case number. And I have 3 samples of my actual signature, which don't match what's on that application even a little." The table went silent the way a table goes silent when a plate stops midair. I reached into my bag and set the folder down next to the roast, squared at the edges the way I square everything, and I didn't open it yet. I just let it sit there while my mother's face went through the exact sequence I'd expected: confusion, then the beginning of an excuse, then something colder underneath both, the look of a person doing math she doesn't want to finish. "I don't know what you're talking about," Glenn said, too fast, the way people say it when they know exactly what you're talking about. "The car's on your lot right now," I said, still calm. "Silver SUV, paper plate. Bethany posted about it 8 months ago. Same week the loan was originated. Same week Mom asked me for a copy of my ID for an insurance update." Bethany's face went white in a way that told me everything about who had known and who had simply chosen, very hard, not to ask. My mother tried the line I knew was coming, the one she always reaches for when a story gets away from her. "We were going to tell you eventually. We were going to make the payments and just fix it quietly before you ever had to know it was messy." "You didn't fix anything," I said. "You forged a signature, took out $34,000 in my name, bought your daughter a car with it, and just now stood up in front of everyone and took credit for saving me from a problem you created. That's not a favor. That's a confession with a toast attached." I opened the folder then, slid the credit file across the table where Glenn could see it, then the forged signature next to my real ones, then the badge log with its timestamp circled in pen. I didn't need to say another word. I've learned that the truth reads itself out loud if you just set it down where people can see it. My mother reached for the pages, hands shaking, and I watched her try to find an angle and fail, because there wasn't one. A notary's timestamp doesn't care about anyone's feelings. Neither does a corporate badge log. Glenn started talking over her, blaming the lender, blaming a manager, blaming anyone whose name wasn't his, the same reflex people always reach for once the paper's already on the table. I didn't stay to referee it. I picked the folder back up, gently, the way you handle something you've already finished with, and I said the only thing I'd actually come to say. I already filed the dispute. The account's frozen and coming off my report either way. The police report exists whether or not I ever do anything more with it. That part isn't a negotiation anymore. What happens with the two of you now is between you and whoever the DA decides to call. I stood up, thanked Bethany for the invitation, and told her congratulations, and I meant it, because none of this was really hers to carry either, even if she'd known more than she'd admitted. Then I left the roast half-eaten and drove home with the folder on the passenger seat, the way I'd once imagined driving home from a hard client meeting, except this client was the family that raised me. The account came off my credit file completely within 3 weeks, backed by the badge logs and the police report, a clean, fast resolution, because a forged notarization with a provable alibi is about as airtight a dispute as exists. The lender's own fraud unit opened a wider file on the dealership once mine was confirmed. I wasn't the only name in that stack, and I wasn't the one who put the others there. What happens next with Glenn is now a conversation between him and people with badges, not people with wine glasses. My mother has called twice since. Both times, she wants to talk about moving past it as a family. I haven't said no. I also haven't said yes. I've told her, plainly, that I'll answer honestly when she's ready to say the word forgery out loud instead of the word fixed. She hasn't managed it yet. Bethany reached out on her own, separately, and asked if she could come see my place sometime, no agenda. I said yes to that one, because she was the only person at that table who looked, afterward, like she understood exactly what had been done in her name, and didn't like it either. Here's what I know now that I didn't fully know before that dinner. Some families will hand you a crisis, call it a gift, and expect applause for the wrapping paper. The only real defense against that is the same thing I use every day at work. You don't argue with a story. You just lay the numbers down where everyone can see them and let the numbers finish the sentence for you. If your family has ever tried to hand you their mess with a bow on it and call it help, tell me about it in the comments. And subscribe to Hidden Family Revenge, where the quiet ones keep the receipts and the paperwork always tells the truth eventually.